have to, as a leader, be able to set strategy. You have to be able to come up with strategy to figure out what's going to work in your circumstance for whatever you're dealing with. The second thing is you have to inspire people.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Entrepreneurship 101 and our presentation tonight on entrepreneurial leadership, building and managing a team. I'd like to give a shout out to everyone watching on the webcast coming from NORCAT in Sudbury, Innovation Factory in Hamilton, and Haltech. Tonight we have a special treat. This is the first lecture of this topic that we've had, so this is one of our refreshed lectures this year. Has anybody here heard Charles Plant speak before? So you're the diehards that are back for another treat. He's actually one of our best speakers. We saved the best for last, so hang in there because we've got a couple really good speakers coming up, including Charles. Just before I get into his intro, I just wanted to introduce one event. I mentioned this last week that on July 1st, there is a new anti-spam legislation known as CASL that comes into force. We have a best practices on Wednesday, April 16th at 12 p.m. with our partners Miller Thompson. For those on the webcast, the video will be available about a week after that if you want to check that out on our video section online. It is pretty strict anti-spam legislation, so especially if you are doing anything with email with your customers, we definitely recommend that you take a look at the video just to protect yourself. And with that, I would like to introduce Charles. Charles is a serial entrepreneur, and as a serial entrepreneur, it's actually hard to keep him focused. So he's jumped around a lot in different lectures. He started out, I think, doing the VC lecture. Then he was doing bootstrapping, which is next week. There's a version of that, and if you can see some of his older lectures online, they're really good. Last year, he threatened to quit because he wanted to focus on his business, so we had a social media campaign to get him back. So we wanted to, I've always wanted to say this, back by popular demand is Charles Plant. And we did hear somebody before the lecture say that they would pay money to hear him read the tax code, which is good because he's an accountant, so he likes to read the tax code in his free time. He is actually the founder and chairman of a company called Material Minds. It's a management training company that he started because he had run into too many managers that were overworked, overwhelmed, and armed with little management training in this era of knowledge workers, which is completely different from being an industrial worker. It seems like the work never ends and you never know what to do, and there's always too many emails coming at you. In a career spanning 30 years, he's coached over 1,000 managers. He actually spent 4 years at Mars, where he built some of the essential components of what we offer entrepreneurs, including our market intelligence team. He had the idea for workshops, and he was the genesis of the idea for the Entrepreneur's Toolkit and all the online resources. Along with that, he also started a program that helps over 2,000 technology startups. Before Mars, he spent 15 years as co-founder and CEO of Cynamics, a telecommunications software firm that provided mass calling platforms to telcos. Additionally, he is taught at York's Schulich School of Business and now teaches at the University of Toronto School of Continuing Studies. If you like what he has to say about management, he is actually speaking on a little bit of a different topic, Communitech, on April 10th. And with that, I would like to introduce Charles Plant.
Thanks, Carrie. Someday I hope to be cut out by popular demand, but that's not going to happen. And thank you very much, Andy Sinclair. I will be pleased to read the Income Tax Act to you afterwards as something I know you'll need to get to sleep. Last week you talked about hiring. So you've dealt mostly with the building the team. We're going to deal more with the managing the team, presuming that you've got a bunch of people in place. What on earth do you do with them now? And I want to go and take a little blast from the past. And this is me about 25 years ago. I'm in the beard, in case you can't figure that out. And that is me and my partner, Jamie Coots. We founded a company called Cynamics that made telecom software. And I said that to somebody recently, and somebody said, "Oh, telecom. You don't hear that term much anymore. Nobody starts telecom businesses anymore. It's apps or something else." Telecom was a frightful way to go, selling to large telephone companies from a little tiny base. But the importance of this is that when I started that company, I had a classical education. I had been trained in marketing, in accounting, in finance, in everything under the world, but I knew absolutely nothing about managing people. I had managed people before, but that doesn't mean I knew anything about managing them. This company put me under fire having to manage people, not knowing now what do I do. And I must admit, I blew it. I wasn't particularly good. And the problem is that as a manager, you learn from watching others. You learn from what other people are doing. You learn by talking about those things with your peers, and you learn from trying things out. Well, all I could do was learn from trying it out. I remember one guy we hired, we actually named a club after him. It was the Willie Lyons Club. And Willie Lyons, if you're listening to this, congratulations. You were infamous in my books. Willie Lyons agreed to join us, accepted an offer, signed the papers. Everything was due to start on some fine Monday morning, and 9 o'clock he hadn't showed up, and 10 o'clock he hadn't showed up. And we eventually tried to phone him, ended up talking to his mother, and found out, no, he never quit his last company. So that was one of our first hires that never showed up. Another hire very close to that time was a woman whose name, fortunately, I forget, because she joined us, and on the second day, she announced that she had committed to a group that she joined to do something different in her life, so she'd like to borrow $10,000 to buy a house. Well, two parts to that. Number one, borrowing $10,000 on your second day of work is audacious, to say the least. The worst part, though, is that in those days, you could actually buy a house with $10,000 down. That was my trial by fire dynamics. And I've spent a long time trying to figure out and trying to learn something about this subject of management. And every year that goes by, I find I'm learning just a little bit more than I learned the year before. And what really blows me away is how much I really don't know. And in the last couple of years, I took a look at the subject of leadership. And I said, okay, how can I break down leadership into something that makes it understandable? And I started researching and figuring out what is leadership, what does it mean, what do you have to do to be a good leader? And I presume you've all read this stuff on leadership. It's voluminous. There is a ton written on leadership. And I read and I read and I read and I read. And I eventually came up with a list of 84 different attributes that you need to understand to be a good leader. And I went, well, that's impossible. You can't learn 84 different things. And it's also why you get some people who are good at these 15 and other people are good at these 12, but they're both good leaders. When it comes down to it, I spent a lot of time trying to distill what it meant to be a good leader. And I came down to 3 separate things. And we're going to talk a bit about the third one tonight. But the 3 separate things about being a good leader is you have to, as a leader, be able to set strategy. You have to be able to come up with strategy to figure out what's going to work in your circumstance for whatever you're dealing with. The second thing is you have to inspire people. Now, you at least have to not turn them off at the end of the day. Because you've probably met some bosses with whom you're perfectly willing to work who aren't really inspirational, but they're okay. And as long as someone doesn't really turn you off and piss you off or do something totally egregious, it's okay to work for that person. The third thing is leaders have to be good at executing strategy. And this is something that's forgotten by tons and tons of people. They don't include it in leadership. I wrote a blog the other day about the meaning of the word executive. And what do you think the derivation of that word is? It's execute, exactly. An executive has to be good at executing. But when they talk about what executives do and what leaders do, they don't talk about execution. They talk about strategy and they talk about inspiration. What we're going to talk about tonight, because there's lots of stuff that you can read about strategy and lots of stuff that you can read about inspiration, we're going to talk about the executing stuff. So let's go back for a second. Carrie actually intimated the difference between the industrial economy and the knowledge economy. When you arrived at work in the industrial economy, you knew exactly what you had to do to be successful. You knew that there was an order for 4,200 widgets that you had to produce during that day. And as the day went on, you knew exactly how well you were doing. You would be sitting at a machine, operating it, or you'd be a supervisor of a mill, or you'd be somewhere up the line, and you were getting information all the time on how you're doing and operating your machine. And you've got dials and levers to tell you how you're doing. At 11 o'clock, you'll know you've produced 1,500. You should have produced 1,650. By 3 o'clock, you've caught up. You're at 4,000, and you end the day early, finishing with 4,200 widgets, exactly like you'd expected. You go home at the end of that day knowing exactly how you'd done. Nobody had to tell you. You've produced it. You've done what you've expected to do. Salespeople can get that. They know pretty well how they're doing, if they're dealing with small sales, how they're doing on a regular basis. But that was true of the industrial economy. What's unfortunate is that it's completely different in the knowledge economy. The knowledge economy doesn't have dials and levers the way the industrial economy did to be able to tell you how you're doing. So work in the knowledge economy is very ambiguous. It's very hard. You don't know you don't know really what you have to do. You don't know how you're doing, and you don't know when you're done. And the best example I've got of that is a friend of mine who's a book editor. And I talk to her frequently about the job she's doing. And she's really confused by it. And she's frequently trying to deal with self-doubt about her ability to perform in her job situation. Because if you can imagine, you have to edit a book. How long should editing a book take? What is the process of editing a book that allows you to tell yourself what you should expect to do? How do you know how you're doing, and how do you know when you're done? When you're editing a book, what does finished editing the book mean? Does it mean that I've run out of time, or that the book now looks good? When you're producing a widget, you know at the end of the day that the widget looks like that, and there is no other opportunity for the widget to look like anything else. But when you're editing a book, you could take a week, a month, you could take a year and edit the same book. And would it be substantially different? Yes, it might be, but does that matter? I don't know. And that's the knowledge economy versus the industrial economy that produces so much angst in people because of the ambiguity. Almost everyone here is in the knowledge economy, I presume. There aren't people in manufacturing for the most part. And as a result of being there, learning to manage people in the knowledge economy is way harder than managing people in the industrial economy. It is a much, much more complex process. In the knowledge economy, your objective as a manager, so we're building and managing a team here, your objective as a manager is not actually to do anything. If you are successful as a manager, you should be actually doing nothing. Now, that's pretty bizarre to say because most people who are in management are spending inordinate amounts of time working phenomenal hours, working nights and weekends, trying to keep their head above water. But what I'm saying is you know you've succeeded as a manager when you're actually doing nothing. When you can wander around all day, chatting with people, chatting with customers, chatting with bosses, whatever you've got. The reason for that is your job as a manager is to get the work done through other people. So you now as an entrepreneur have a team of other people. And while you're 2 people, 3 people, you might have to do some of the work. But as you're going and growing your team, what you've got to think of is every opportunity that you have to get other people to do the work for you is a good thing to do. Now, what you want them to do is the next issue. And what is important and what we're going to go through today is your objective as a manager, when you do no work, is to connect your strategy with the action of your employees. You're connecting so that they know every day what they're doing and how it relates to your strategy as a business. And that's really key to managing a team, connecting that strategy with the action. So, connecting strategy with action seems like it should be a relatively simple thing. I went into a company recently to help them out, and I said to the CEO, show me your strategic plan. And so I went over a strategic plan, and okay, that's fine. And then I said to the people, so tell me what you're working on. And I had a few conversations, and I scratched my head, and I said, can each of you write down what you're working on, your priorities and things like that? And I collected all of the information they'd given me, and I sat down with the CEO and said, there's no relationship between your strategic plan and what your people are working on? None whatsoever. And he looked and he scratched his head and he went, yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's what happens in companies. It's something that the strategic plan gets created at some point in time, and then it gets put in a drawer. And the people end up doing what they feel like or what they think is right, or frequently what the problem of the day is. They're no longer associated with the strategy. They end up prioritizing the problem of the day instead of the strategy. So connecting strategy with your action, you have to know what success is. And I ask people this question. I ask bosses, what's success mean to you? And the boss usually knows. And I start asking other people in the organization, and I get the strangest expressions from people when I say that. They look blank. Some people even say, you know, I really wish I knew what success meant. You have to know, and your people have to know what success means. You have to know what your strategy is. You have to break that strategy down into its various different parts. You have to assign the work in such a way that the work that everyone is doing is connecting directly back up with that strategy. Now, I admit that I have been bad at this in the past. I have done just like other people have done. I have gone and put the strategic plan in the drawer and realized ages later that people weren't working on what I hoped they were working on. So we all do it. It's a natural tendency, but it's something you have to get over. So what I want to do is I have a little exercise. And I'm not sure if you get asked this very often. I'd like you all to stand up, please. And if you can put the stuff that you're holding in your hands, you won't need to take notes about this. You might actually remember this. I'd like you to stand with your feet like about a foot apart. And I'd like you to extend your hands in front of your body with your arms, with your elbows crooked. So your elbows, yeah, that's about right. And I'd like you to move your elbows and shoulders in and bring your hands together. Elbows in, no, bring your hands together. That's it, okay. And do it again. Okay, can you lift your hands up a little? Okay, that's good, try it again. Okay, good. Let's try it a different way. I'd like you to clap. Okay, you can sit down now. Now, what did I do there? What did I do the first time? I was a micromanager, exactly. I was the perfect, ultimate micromanager, the thing that I don't want any of you to be, because I told you exactly what I wanted you to do and what happened. You did it. You did it. Your hands came together. No sound was made. But you did exactly what I said. You even moved your arms up so that they were better poised to do that. What type of managing was I doing at the beginning? Not just micromanaging. I was managing your activities instead of managing your results. And so when you look at it, in the first hand, when I asked you to do something, I actually told you exactly what your activities were. In the second, I didn't tell you how to clap, did I? I just told you what I wanted the result to be, and you did that. That's the first thing that you've got to remember about effective management, is that you want to manage results, not activities. What everyone has to know at the beginning of the day, and this is the first of 3 rules I'm going to give you, and we'll summarize it at the end, is that the first thing is people have to know exactly what is expected of them. We talked about the industrial economy, where people wake up and at the beginning of the day, they know exactly what's expected. They know they have to produce 4,200 widgets. People somehow have to know exactly what is expected of them in the knowledge economy, or they're not going to succeed. So you look at someone like a social media manager. Is anybody here in social media? Or, yeah, okay. So if you see a job description of a social media manager, it might say something like, build a vibrant user community. Does that sound like a good job for a social media person? What's that mean? What does vibrant mean? Does it mean that it vibrates regularly? That it creates sound waves that echo through the troposphere? What is a community? What's a user? I mean, most job descriptions, and you think of your own job descriptions if you've got them, or think of the ones you've had in the past. They usually start out with expressions like build a vibrant user community, don't they? They don't set out with something very specific. And that's the first flaw of telling people exactly what they have to know. How do they know if they're successful? How does the person building social media or engaged in social media know if they're successful or not? People need to know what is expected of them exactly in a way that they can be successful. The way they do this, and the way it's done in the very biggest corporations, and we'll get to some examples, is they use metrics. And most companies, when you go in and talk to them, they say, oh yeah, we've got metrics. But when you look at them, the CEO has metrics, some of the VPs have metrics, and then they peter out all the way down to most of the people in the organization don't have no way of measuring at any point in time what they're doing, how they're doing it, and why they're doing it. The thing about metrics is that everyone must be measured. What you've got to measure is understand, and we won't go through a large description of metrics tonight. Some things to think about is you have to measure results and activities. And the reason for measuring both of them is that your activities should be connected to results. There should be some sort of causal relationship between your activity and the result that drives success that you're measuring. So the activity and the completion of them and some of the earlier measures can result in what are leading indicators, and your results are lagging indicators. What's key there is if you have those types of things for an individual like a social media manager, they know every day what they have to do in terms of activities and the causal relationship to results, and therefore what success is and how they're doing. So as a social media manager, if you're supposed to be building the vibrant community, you should know that perhaps your vibrant community means that you want 20,000 followers on Twitter who are engaging with you in some way, and you can measure engagement as they tweet about you on a regular basis. For instance, up here, Mars has Twitter followers, Ent101 has Twitter followers. There are a certain number of people who tweet about Ent101. A way of measuring engagement with the community is measuring the number of people that tweet about you or the number of people that retweet. And that's something you can figure out every day and know every day if you're on target or not. You can see how your volume is going. You can actually go and do something. Okay, well, I engaged in this campaign today, and it resulted in this type of increase. Therefore, I know that people care more about this subject of bootstrapping than they care about the subject of sales. So that you spend more time on bootstrapping than you spend on sales. That's the purpose of metrics. This is also something, you've seen the movie Moneyball? Who here has seen the movie? So enough of you have seen it. If you haven't, it is a perfect movie for nerds who like sports. Because it's about the concept of sabermetrics. And Billy Beane, the manager of the Oakland A's, had to compete against much wealthier teams and without nearly the budget they had. And so he started following what was sabermetrics, and he used different measures for looking at his potential employees than other people were using. And he used different methods, measures of gauging of how they were doing. And those measures that he was using had better causal relationship with the results he wanted than the measures that everyone else was using. Everyone else would sit around and discuss potential players, and they'd say, oh yeah, he's a good guy. Oh yeah, he's strong on the left, or he's weak when he's in the right, or something like that. Instead of saying, no, when he is up with two men on plate and he gets a left-handed hitter, whatever the number is. Knowing those precise numbers in Moneyball allowed Billy Beane to compete against the very best teams in baseball very successfully. Unfortunately, because he was so successful, it was adopted by the other teams, and the Oakland A's are back where they want it to be. But luckily, no one will find this out when you're running a company and beating them to death. Now, in case you think I'm crazy about metrics, and I really am, and I'll preach this till the cows come home, this is what Google does. And if you read the book In the Plex, you'll get a full description of how Google does what they call OKRs, objectives and key results. There is also a video on YouTube, and all you have to do is Google OKRs. and that'll get you a video that's by one of the people who is in Google Venture Partners. John Doerr, who came out of Intel and learned this system at Intel, taught it to Google when the company was about a year old. And he mandated its use and convinced them to use this. Google has gone wild, of course, because they love anything that's evidence-based, and they're using it very successfully throughout the organization. And they're also trying to get their investee companies to use it as well. So Google has gone with this. And the reason OKRs work is that everyone has a number of key objectives. And they have a number of results that they measure with each of these. They do it quarterly. And every person in the company can find out what every other person's OKRs are. So if you're sitting anywhere in the company, you can look up and see Sergey's and Larry's OKRs for that quarter and see how they're doing. Total accountability, total transparency, and a system that has been very successful and in their nerd-like fascination with evidence and things is something that is embodied in the culture of Google now. So this isn't just for the largest companies, the Allied Signals, the Intels, the companies that are particularly good at managing this. Google did it from the beginning, and it's part of why they are great now. So if you imagine your social media person at Google has an objective to build a vibrant community, has things like tweeting 5 times a day on average, a number of different activities that have to be engaged in, and on a quarterly basis, that person is going to evaluate themselves against their key objectives and start out the next quarter. So this gets into job design, and this is the management skill. In what we're talking about tonight, I'm going to talk a little bit about metrics. We're going to talk about the management skill, and then the leadership skill that goes with it. And all of this, in what we're talking about now, is trying to get this idea of enabling people to know exactly what is expected of them. Because that's the first of the 3 things that we're going to deal with. So in terms of job design, you have to design the job to align and connect with strategy. One thing that many companies don't do is if they don't do that particularly well, and they'll end up with groups inside the company with fiefdoms, groups that compete with each other, individuals that compete with each other. They will have chaos in an organization because of their inability to align through the job description exactly what people should be working on. And I see the funniest job descriptions, even nowadays. I always get a laugh and know that somebody has copied an old one when it says on the bottom of the description, must be proficient in Word and Excel. Has anyone applied for a job where it says that recently? Because last year, okay. I've seen that and I'm amazed. Those are the job descriptions that go on and on and on and on for paragraphs describing everything that could happen in the organization, including being responsible for taking out the garbage every now and then. But what they don't say anywhere in those job descriptions is what results are expected. So you come in, and the first thing you face in a job is you don't really know how to be successful, because no one can focus on 2 pages of things that include being proficient in Word and Excel. Now, you could say that I am not proficient in Word because I am still a 4-finger typist. And what is proficient in Word and Excel? If you really want proficiency in Word, you should be saying able to type 65 words a minute using Word with an error rate of such and such. That's a result that you could put in a job description that makes someone know exactly what they have to do to be successful when they walk in the door. Now, that job description is part of the management skill that is letting people know what's expected of them. The leadership skill is delegation. So if you look at the management skill as job design, the leadership skill that goes along with this is delegation. Everybody says, oh, you've got to delegate, you've got to delegate. You can't take, and so many people struggle to delegate. And one of the reasons they struggle to delegate is, what are you delegating? Are you delegating a process or an activity? And this is where things break down for people, is that they say, we want you to follow this process. Well, I got you to follow a process that created no noise whatsoever. Instead of saying, I'm delegating to you this result. You have the responsibility and authority to deliver this result. And if it's not working, I want you to change the process so it does work. So I don't care what the process is. Somehow you have to communicate that with me if you're changing it, but you need to deliver this result. And when you delegate in that way, people have the power in their jobs that makes them happy. And you read things like Daniel Pink's book on drive. And what is it that drives people? What makes people want to come to work? One of the things that makes people want to come to work is an ownership of their job. If they have the responsibility and authority to do what they think is best, then that's the first step in making them happy in their job. And in order to do that, they have to have metrics. So, another exercise. What do you think you have to do now? Stand up. Very good. And I won't give you the same exercise again because you'd cheat. So I'd like you to clap, please. Okay, clap again. Okay, clap again. And again. Okay. Now, if you'd noticed, your first clapping was, we can sit down, by the way. You can sit down again. Did you notice the first time you clapped was louder than the last time? Were you sitting there, or standing, sorry, you were standing. Were you standing there wondering, what on earth is he making me do this for? He's asked me 4 times in a row to do the same thing? How did you feel about that? Like, is this a waste of time? Why am I doing this again? That's what it's like at work. Right? Can you do this? Can you do this again? Okay, can you do it again, please? Okay, and you go into work, and you do it again, and you do it again, and you do it again. What haven't I told you that whole time? Why? I haven't told you why, which should be in the first part. What else haven't I told you? Huh? Sorry? When you're done? Yeah? And I haven't told you how you're doing. I didn't say that's good, or great job, good clapping, okay? I didn't give you any feedback whatsoever. What happened when I didn't give you any feedback? Your performance declined. Isn't it amazing? Even in 2 seconds, a minute, your performance declined in a way that was noticeable. And if I'd kept you going for another 3 rounds of clapping, you would have been standing there staring at me wondering, what on earth am I doing this for? That's what's happening in companies every day. People are staring going, what on earth am I doing this for? I keep doing it, I don't know why I'm doing it, and I don't know how I'm doing. This is a ridiculous waste of time. This is where metrics come in. If you remember back in the industrial economy, people come in at the beginning of the day knowing exactly what they have to do. They also know during the day, how am I doing? And if you go to Daniel Pink's Drive again, you'll see that this is really critical for people to have some sort of feedback, some sort of mechanism that tells them exactly how they're doing on a regular basis. Fine, or you're doing fine, isn't good enough. You're doing okay. Then it becomes a game of, well, what does that mean? Last week it was okay, and this week is fine. Is fine worse than okay, or is fine better than okay? Does fine mean I'm going to be fired soon because it was okay and it's no longer okay, but it's fine? This is what torments and tortures people at work all the time. They're sitting there wondering, you know, I get to chat with my boss once every 3 months, and every now and then she'll say something to me about how I'm doing, but I really don't understand what they mean. And you've got one boss who's in the person's face every day going, you know, this is great, you're doing really well. And another boss who doesn't say anything at all. Well, you'd rather work for the boss that says, this is great, but what does this is great mean? This is great, like, until you're fired, because it's not so great now, because you really don't know. That's where metrics come in again. You thought I'd get back to metrics, didn't you? Metrics tells you whether you're being successful or not. The great thing about them is, if you're measuring your own metrics, you don't need somebody else to tell you that you're being successful. You know you're being successful. You know that your job description says that you have to get a certain level of engagement out of your social media audience. And you know every day, every week, every month how that's doing. So as long as the company is still in business, you're doing okay. You know you're doing okay. You can tell that you're doing okay. It's great when you can have those measures. Now, those measures can exist for some people on a daily basis, some people weekly, some people monthly, and some people, unfortunately, annually. But everybody can have that measurement that tells them how they're doing. If you look at Google and their OKRs, their system actually measures things and forces the individual to report their measurements on a quarterly basis. Now, I don't happen to believe in a quarter. I believe in measuring things at least monthly, because I think a quarter is too long. Be that as it may, they're more successful than I am. If you're measuring them, then you can say, okay, I met 100% of this result. I met 70% of this one. I met 60% of that one. Overall, you can actually come up with a number, and they do at Google come up with a number that says, I meet 70 to 80% of my objectives. And that is good for them. They believe that the objectives and key results should be slightly stretched so that people have to reach, that if they bang on, if they get them, they're not working hard enough, that they should be something that they get towards. But it becomes part of your being at work to know how you're doing and to know how everybody else in the organization is doing as well. And there's a management process for this, and it's called performance management. Now, many people, particularly the ones in HR, talk about performance management when they refer to that thing called the appraisal that happens on an annual basis, right? This is not the appraisal that happens on an annual basis. I'm not even going to talk about the appraisal that happens on an annual basis. This is 365 days of coaching as opposed to 1 day of retribution. The performance management process is something, take a look at the wording. It's to manage your performance, which means that you have to be doing it all the time. Canadian Tire is a great example of an organization because they actually have, in the head office, they have a weekly discussion. Every manager has a discussion with every employee on a weekly basis to say how they're doing and if there are any problems, et cetera. And they have a monthly written discussion. Well, they don't discuss writing. The employee writes a report, and they sit down and discuss that report on a formal basis on a monthly basis. Now, some people, I tell this to people, and they think, oh, it takes way too much time to do that. But if you remember back to what I said in the beginning, your job as a manager is not to do things yourself. Your job as a manager is to get things done through other people. So if you're getting them done through other people, you should have lots of time to sit down and talk to every person you've got. You probably don't have more than a dozen. A dozen conversations, an hour apiece, every month is 12 hours. We're talking a day and a half out of a month. And this is your most important part of your job, is getting things done through other people. And in order to get it done, you have to manage their performance, which is why performance management has to be something occurring all the time in an organization and really critical to its success, not the annual thing. Now, along with the management skill, there's a leadership skill. And that leadership skill is communication. They say, leaders have to be great communicators. They have to be delegators. They have to be communicators. The great thing about a monthly discussion of performance is that it forces communication. Most managers are afraid to sit down and have discussions with their team on how they're doing. They figure, I don't like this. I don't know exactly what I should be talking about. I don't know exactly how to deal with these people. But here you've got an occasion now on a monthly basis to sit down, to have a discussion with the person, and you've got something to discuss. What are you discussing? You're discussing their metrics. You're discussing their results. You have their results in front of you to discuss. You know how they're doing. So you can actually have a cogent conversation that says, you're slipping here. Why are you slipping? Or you did really well here. So you have a chance to communicate how things are doing and answer that question, the second of the two questions. First one, how am I doing? The next, first one, what's expected of me? Secondly, how am I doing? You can answer it well. We're going to do this again. You got to stand up once again. If nothing else, you'll remember this bizarre clapping exercise and try and relate it back in your mind when you're managing. The purpose of clapping is to show approval. It's not just to make noise, is it? Now, you can show light approval, you can show strong approval. There are various different ways in which you can show approval. But clapping in itself is not the end. The objective is to show approval. So I want you to innovate in how you show approval. I want you to come up with some new ways of showing approval, and I want you to show more approval than you did when we went through the last clapping exercise. So let's start. Everybody try it. No, everybody together. Everybody together. There, you did it, didn't you? That's perfect. Okay, you did it so well, you can sit down. You guys are learning, absolutely. So I noticed a number of things were happening. People were clapping, and they were clapping strongly. There were people whistling. There were people shouting. There were people stamping feet. There was somebody over here hitting a chair. What was the volume of noise like? It was much better, wasn't it? You were showing great approval. Now, what did we just do? Yeah, I coached you. And this is the third thing that you need to do with people who are reporting to you. You have to enable them to know how they can improve. So they have to know what they have to do, they have to know how they're doing, and they have to know how they can improve. And you go back and you say, well, why is this important? Each of us, it's something about the human condition. We all want to get better at what we're doing. We're not satisfied. You are sitting here tonight because you want to get better at something. Whether it's starting a business or getting better at the business you're in, or even if it's getting better working for somebody else, you're here because you want to get better. Everybody innately wants to get better. Everybody at work needs to know how they can improve. You as a manager have to tell them what to do, how they're doing, and how they can improve for them to be successful. And that is the third of our three. Now, what do you want to improve? You want to improve measurable results. What do we just do? Your clapping was going downhill when I just told you to clap and clap again. When I told you, come on, show some noise, you showed good noise. You improved. You did a much better job of that. Now, metrics become the benchmark for improvement. If you don't know how you're doing, you don't know whether you've improved or not. Can you imagine playing golf for a year and not knowing how you did, ever? Going out, playing golf every Saturday, not knowing how you did on the fourth hole, the fifth hole, the first nine, the back nine, not getting a result until maybe the end of the year when someone tells you, well, you hit 795 in golf this year. Well, what's that mean? What is 795? What should I have hit? How could I get better? I have no idea of what the 795 results from. That's what's happening at work every single day. People are being told, you just hit 795 in golf for the year. The reason you get a report on golf every hole is so you can learn to get better, is you can learn to improve. So the whole process of scoring in sports is one which is designed to tell you how you can improve. That's the third use of metrics, to tell you what you need to do, to tell you how you're doing, and to let you know if you're improving or not. Now, Google's OKRs. It said that they have 3 to 5 OKRs, and you're expected to score in the 70 to 80% range in your OKRs. If you're getting a 40, then there's a problem. And it makes people sit down and say, okay, what do I have to do? How can I improve in order to get that 40 up to a 70 to 80? Or, as an alternate, maybe this is something we shouldn't be doing. Maybe the expectations are wrong. All along the way, it's a discussion that is part of that performance management process so that the manager and the employee know exactly what is necessary to improve. And the great thing is, if you've given the employee responsibility and authority and said, this is the number I want you to achieve, then that person is going on an ongoing basis trying to beat that number. The best example of innovation I have is the Canadian government, a number of years ago, enacted a law that created a whole industry in Canada. And they did it with one pen stroke at zero cost to the government, zero cost to the economy, and produced a phenomenal result. And that was when they said that Canadian radio stations must play X% Canadian content. It was a simple law. Before that, there was no music industry in Canada. And that simple metric that said, sorry, you want a radio license, you have to produce X%, produced a whole industry that has Canadians being exported down south of the border now and creating business for Canadian music elsewhere throughout the world. That single thing of that single number is what connected us to success in the music industry. And unfortunately, the government hasn't since then figured out how to use it effectively in other industries. But the management skill here that we're dealing with is coaching. And it's a monthly conversation. It's not something that you do at the annual performance appraisal time. It's not something you even do monthly if you can meet with the people more often. It's something you do when you see an opportunity to help someone improve the results. If you see an opportunity to give them ideas or to get them to say, you know, is there a better way of doing this? Can I do something better to improve what I'm doing? Ask them how they can improve, focus on the results, focus on improving their results. Now, the leadership skill associated with that is motivation. And it seems an odd one because everybody thinks about rewards and recognition as being motivational. But when it comes down to it, those are passing. You know, you get congratulated in public one day. 2 days later, you're just the same as any other bum in the office. You get a big bonus. 2 weeks later, you're grumbling about how much you're paid. Those things are, you know, they pass by. But the key about getting people and showing them how they can improve is it gives them something to work towards and it motivates them every single day. Because they have a clearly defined path to the future where you've said, these results, if you can get these results from here to here, this is what's going to happen. So in a funny way, you know, we're motivated to be successful. We are motivated as individuals to do our best. And what you have to do is unleash that capability by telling people how they're doing and how they can do better, enabling them to do this, because all along, your objective is to do nothing, and your objective is to come to work every day, connecting your strategy with their action. Now, it's interesting the way this works, because this has a really direct impact on two things that people don't expect. It has an impact on teamwork, and it has an impact on culture. And in teamwork, I've got here, and Patrick Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Anybody read it? It's an entertaining book. If you've got a chance, read it, because you'll identify things that happen when you're at work and things like that. But the pyramid of the 5 dysfunctions, the top 3 you can look at. The first is there's an inattention to results in a dysfunctional team. Well, if you've got a team where everyone knows exactly what the results are expected and how they're doing, then people are going to pay attention to results. And there's something phenomenal that happens when I work with companies on this, is that I start out through the process and I help people learn to measure what they're doing. And it takes a while, but somewhere in around the 10-hour level, you can see people's faces change. You can actually see them think differently, and what they talk about is entirely different. They, instead of talking about process, they change all their talk to talk about results. The second problem with teamwork is avoidance of accountability. Teams, if they're not told explicitly what they're accountable for, try and avoid it. I mean, people do. You know? The dishes are dirty. Somebody else is going to deal with those dishes. But where it's clearly measured what you're doing, then it's hard not to be accountable. If you are made accountable for results, then it's very clear what you're supposed to be doing, and you can't deny that. If it's in your job description, if it's in your monthly evaluation, if it's in your annual one, it's very clear what you're accountable for. That gets rid of the ambiguity that leads to a lack of commitment in people. Commitment's hard to get. You know, when we did the second clapping exercise, you weren't committed to it. You could see, you'd clap a little bit, but it wasn't going anywhere. By making people accountable and measuring the results, you get a level of commitment that you don't get otherwise. And sometime, if you have a chance to do that, if you change your job, and you can mentally go and you can change your job and say, okay, I'm going to focus on results from now on instead of on activities, you will actually change the way you think over time, and it's phenomenal. If you do that for a whole company, you could change the culture of the company. And I look at culture in a number of ways. I look at culture as the values that the company has. I look at culture as the traditions, the things that they engage in on a regular basis. But even more than that, to me, culture is embodied in how people communicate and how they make decisions. And those last two are something you can really influence by changing to a metrics-driven, results-oriented organization. Because when you start communicating now, you're communicating about results instead about, and you're communicating about evidence. And you move to what's referred to as evidence-based management. Now, some of you might have heard the term evidence-based medicine. You know, I don't know how doctors were making decisions before there was evidence-based medicine, and frankly, it scares me. If you think about that, you think, well, if you're not making a decision based on evidence, how are you making it? Well, you're making it based on values. And this is what's terrible in companies, is that people's values differ. You can't make consistent decisions based on values, but you can make consistent decisions based on evidence. So when you move an organization towards metrics and results, all of a sudden the decisions are all made based on those metrics and all based on evidence. One of the best examples at Google that I've heard recently is that Google had a process where you had to take 7 or 8 interviews to get a job. Well, they did an analysis of that process and determined that they were no better off predicting success at 4 interviews than they were at 8. So they dropped the last 4 interviews. They made a decision based on evidence, not based on values in the organization, because they were measuring those things and because someone had that in their OKRs to determine whether the process was working or not. So the first part is decision making. The second part is communication. When you have these results and you're measuring everybody on results, it's no longer ambiguous. It's open and clear to everyone in the organization exactly what's going on. You have successfully then connected your strategy to the daily action of all employees, which is the key to success in managing. Now, this chart's hard to read, perhaps, from where you are, but I think the slideshow is put up by Mars, so you can actually see this and think about it. This is the structure of what we were talking about tonight. The employees need to know what should they do, how they're doing, and how they can improve. That is answered by defining success. And you define success in results and activities through metrics. And if you look at the what should I do, you use metrics for your job design, and you use metrics to enable yourself to delegate better. In how am I doing, you use metrics in performance management to allow people to determine how they're doing and to communicate those results better. And how can I improve? You use metrics in coaching people and in motivating them. Now, it's taken me a long time to arrive at that. I've experimented with it for over 30 years, little piece by piece, arriving at what works and doesn't work. I wish I worked at Google 10 years ago. I'd be wealthier, but I'd also know better what I don't know right now. It's hard to do. It's complex. And unfortunately, this whole issue of strategy execution is not sexy. But the thing that is sexy is success. And this is what drives success. So thank you very much.
So thanks, Charles. It's a great way to take a lot of subjects and management and leadership and put them together. I just have one cog to your grand theory. What happens with attitude? So you might have somebody on your team that achieves great results, maybe overachieves, but their attitude is bad or they're a toxic employee. So you might remember Robert Sutton wrote that book, The No Asshole Rule. So how do you deal with assholes?
You get rid of them.
Just like that?
Just like
so
that.
That's the one case where metrics don't matter.
Yeah, I mean, the superstar performer, but you see, you might be measuring one type of metric, but not another. And another type of metric to measure is satisfaction of coworkers. Does the person get along? So, you need to adapt the metrics to the circumstance. If it's a sole performer that doesn't need to get along with people, that's fine. But if it's someone that has to get along with people as well as be successful, then you better be measuring the getting along with people in some manner. Are there other questions? I tried to finish enough time to give people a few minutes. Yep.
Oh, sorry, just for the webcast, can you use the mic so they can hear the question? There's one on the other side, too.
Oh, sorry, are people lining up at the mics? Did I interrupt that process?
Hi, my name is Lori. I'm just about to enter into hiring contract individuals, and I'm having a really hard time. I have a big fear figuring how are they going to be motivated if I can only hire them, say, once to twice a month for a 5-hour period. How do I keep them not showing up?
Same things. Exactly. You've got to let them know what they have to do, how they're doing, and how they're done.
That I can do.
Absolutely. And, they'll want to work in a place where they get that feedback more than they'll work elsewhere.
Good.
And you give them that feedback, then they will be coming back. Whereas if you don't give them the feedback, if everybody's paying them the same, they'll go to the place where they feel better.
That's good.
So.
Okay, well, that's good. I hope to make them feel better because that's why I made my business, because of the disengaged employees.
Good.
Thank you.
Good luck. Yep.
Good.
Go ahead.
Okay. I think it was Peter Drucker said that a great deal of what we do at work consists of stopping people from working. Would you like to say something about management by not thwarting?
Well, you're absolutely right. And Peter Drucker also said some great things. Oddly enough, I hand out his books, as old as they might be still. You're describing an environment there which is process-oriented. And that's management by thwarting people from doing great things. If you say, this is the process that you have to follow, and you punish people for not following the process, then the result, it does not matter. You are thwarting them from being able to improve. You don't allow them to do the things, to use their mind, to use their creativity, to change the process, to meet the needs. And that worked in the industrial economy because if you've got an array of machines in front of you, you have to follow the process or the whole system breaks down. But in the knowledge economy, if you follow the process, the whole system will break down and you are thwarting people's abilities.
What happens if the process is, Charles, if the process is designed to help them achieve the results? So by not following process, they get worse results than if they followed the process.
Well, frankly, you just tell them, these are the results I want. You tell me the process you need to follow.
But there's still process needed.
You still need process, absolutely, but it's up to them to develop the process. It's not up to you to tell them what the process is. You tell them the results, they tell you the process, instead of the other way around.
Thank you for a great presentation. I wanted to see if you could think of any material, like literature on strategic thinking, like more specific, or if you could, from your own experience, talk about the strategic mindset for the knowledge economy. That's a very broad question. But.
Wow, is that a broad question?
So to help with that question, I have another question on the webcast, just for general books on management and leadership, and as well as strategic planning that you could recommend.
So the specific is specific books that you can think of, or anything broad-minded? Like when you think about strategy in the grand sense, what is like the beacon? I suppose metrics is a big one, but is there anything that comes to mind?
So the book I'm reading right now for an umpteenth time is Execution, which is a particularly good book on the subject of execution. On the subject of strategy, the best thing is to pick up a series of different things. I was thinking, is that Seth Godin? No. The Lean Startup. Okay, the Lean Startup. There's a good one. Anything Seth Godin has written is particularly good on marketing strategy. Who else could I'd have to think.
What was that name?
Seth Godin, S-E-T-H, new word G-O-D-I-N. And he's all over YouTube. You can watch stuff. He wrote The Tribe, Poke the Box. Tim Ferriss wrote a good book called The 4-Hour Workweek. That's a superb book. And if you read that, it's a different way of thinking about what you're doing.
Okay.
And it's a similar way of how can I do as little as possible to be as successful as possible. So that's strategic thinking.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Hi. First of all, I want to thank you for coming to us actually with some actionable ways you can approach this in real life, because
Oh, good.
I think that's something that we actually benefit from here. One thing that I've realized in a lot of teams that I've been on over the years is even when we have excellent metrics and we know what the targets are, we often run into days or weeks or periods where we feel like all we're doing is putting out fires, and we lose that grander vision. And you were talking about how a lot of people end up choosing their work based on what they think is important or putting out those fires. How do you actually get a team to focus on the grander vision and building towards the metrics and building those towards those key successes when fires do come up and that's just a reality of the business?
Yeah, and if you've got a business that has a lot of fires, then there's something's wrong with the business. You might need to fire customers. And what you'll find is that if you analyze the fires, because some people do this, they find out in that analysis that the fires are caused by a number of particular actions, and they change things so that they can focus on the grander vision. Tim Ferriss's book, The 4-Hour Workweek, is particularly good at that because he determined that 90% of his customer complaint queries was from a certain class of customer, so he got rid of those customers. He just told them, I won't do business with you. And that way, got rid of all the problems, was able to focus on the good customers, would only take good customers, and as a result, grew very profitably with no work whatsoever. So my best advice would be analyze the fires and figure out what you're doing wrong. Build a bigger vision based upon an analysis of those.
And I could add a thought to that. Sometimes when you have too much work or there's lots of fires, you go back to reorganizing the work. Sometimes it needs to be rejigged as you're growing and think of other solutions or outsourcing or different ways of the structure, because the structure is breaking sometimes, that there's not enough work and things aren't getting done in a certain way. So organizing how the people do the work.
Yep.
Just wondering, like, what kind of metrics would you recommend for someone who works in like a creative field, like say a graphic designer for a digital agency, where often designs are created and then they move to, they get passed off to a developer and they get put onto a website. So there's like a stream of sort of changes that could happen to those designs. So like web metrics on a site may not actually reflect the metrics that the success of that designer. Do you know what I mean?
You're absolutely right. In fact, what you want to avoid is those downstream metrics because they have nothing to do with your work, or they have very little to do with your work. You want something direct. You can measure three things, which are quality, cost, and speed. So usually if you're doing graphic design, you've got a client who is approving graphic designs. And you've got some process where you're meeting with a client, finding out their needs, coming up with something, and presenting them with something. Have I got that fair?
Yeah.
Well, you can measure number of times that it took to get approval from the client as a measure of quality. Because if you have to produce something, 10 iterations, you're not doing as well as if it takes 2 iterations. It means you're not listening carefully enough to the client in the beginning, or you've got to coach the client better or train the client better or something like that. So you might want to measure number of iterations of client acceptance. You might want to ask the client a question, just a survey at the end, degree of satisfaction with that, because measures of satisfaction are great. I don't know if you have to produce surveys for Ent 101, but you can measure how, if I give a speech, the quality is measured in the degree of satisfaction by the people who attended the speech, because you're not paying anything to come here. So
Yeah.
that satisfaction is a quality metric, the number of iterations is a quality metric, how much time it took to arrive there as a cost metric, the turnaround time from beginning of the process to end of the process is a speed metric. So they're all things that directly relate and are influenceable by what you do exactly.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, Eric Cheng. Thank you very much. I really thought that today was very helpful.
Great.
And I hope that's a good metric.
Yeah.
If the task is a daily routine and it's just like counted based on units, would you think it's more effective that they have real time, like at the end of every day, they know what they, like how many units they finished, or would you think that maybe a monthly review, like, okay, we'll leave the metrics aside so you don't get stressed over that from a day-to-day basis, but perhaps come around to it, okay, I think you did great this month, and let's see how we could deal with the metrics then.
Well, you know, a month is too long probably, and I don't know the specific circumstance, but I'd probably use something like a rolling 7-day number. That way people don't get stressed out by a single day. It rolls forever. Anybody here got a Fitbit?
Yeah.
Fitbits are absolutely marvelous ways of tracking the number of steps I take every day and all sorts of things like that. And there's a website that goes on, and it has a rolling 7-day average or number. So that I can do bad one day and do great another, and it's okay. If you measure every day, then it's really stressful. But if you just look at and if you measure a week, absolutely, that can be stressful too. But if you measure a rolling average, then people know, okay, I've got to catch up, or I can let go a little. I can get a catch up, so they can get into a rhythm that isn't punitive.
Thank you.
And one final question, and then we'll wrap it up.
Thank you. Chanakya, this is like the first time I'm attending a Mars event, and I couldn't believe like a simple clapping exercise could teach so many things. So
Is this your first Mars event ever? Why on earth did you come out to this?
It was you.
Oh,
It's always you, Charles.
thank you.
No, I just moved to Toronto, but my question is like
I'm sorry.
alongside you.
Yeah.
But so I am right now like looking for founders, and so what things should I look for in them, or what metrics should I put when I am like going through the possible founders that I could have?
You mean founder? You mean other co-founders of a
Yeah.
business? Oh boy. Domain expertise, business expertise. There are a couple of. I'm trying to think. So if you got domain and business expertise, then probably next you want to measure their strategic thinking and their ability to meet results. So looking at finding out what they did before is a good measure. What I do in hiring people, oddly enough, is I look for special things that people have done when no one's paying them. And the team I hired originally at Mars, I hired because they'd done wacky things. One person was an opera singer. Another person was an internationally successful model. Another one had traveled the world and learned 6 languages. That was Carrie. So I picked people who had done something that they didn't have to do because of work, that showed that they had initiative, drive, and could get results. And then I looked and said, okay, do they have the right functional background, and do they have the right business knowledge to be successful? So
Thank you.
it's hard to get numbers. It'd take me probably a little while to figure out exact numbers to do, but you can do it.
Thank you.
So thank you very much, Charles. If you're interested in, Charles writes a daily blog, which is fairly interesting, and I find it makes me think a lot about my own management and leadership style, and I'm always learning, so I encourage you to check it out or subscribe, and we'll hopefully get him back next year. It's getting harder and harder. Thank you.
Thanks.